Hey, welcome to the webcast or podcast, however you're joining me today. I am really glad you're here. Today, I got the chance to interview Dave Lewis. Now, Dave has been in the agribusiness world for over 40 years. And he literally stopped by because he retired nearby, and him and I have known each other for quite a while. And he stopped by today to share some of the wisdom and knowledge that he has gained over those 40 years as one of the longest running general managers in one location in the co-op system. And we talk primarily about the sales teams, salespeople, how to build better teams and better salespeople. So I appreciate you stopping by. It is a long interview, so I did put some show notes in so that you can skip ahead just in case you don't have time to listen to the whole thing. But I sure hope you do, because Dave shares some great information for anyone in the agribusiness world. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy. Well, welcome to the Ag Sales Podcast and webinar session. It's a little bit of a unique experience. If you're watching the video, obviously you can see what's going on. I have, Dave Lewis joining me today in my studio, which is also called my home office. But welcome, Dave, and welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here. Glad you invited me.
Excellent. Well, Dave, you and I met several years back. You were in Central West Illinois.
Yep.
Spent a few years there working for the co-op system. Tell us a little bit about your background and where you were and all that you've done in the agribusiness profession.
Sure. Well, to be honest, ag's been my entire life. Grew up in Quincy, Illinois on a dairy farm. Hard work, milk cows before I went to high school and all that stuff. You learn that work ethic at a young age on a dairy farm, and usually that sticks with you.
Sure.
After that, went on to Spoon River College and Canton, Illinois, took ag management technology and got done with that. And I worked for my cousin, who was a home builder, for 3 years actually, and enjoyed learning carpentry skills and all that goes into that. But if you remember, in 1979, Jimmy Carter was president. Interest rates went to 18%.
I do. Yeah.
Anyway, that home building thing really came to a screeching halt, and I answered an ad in the Quincy paper for a feed salesman at Rushville, Illinois. So I started my FS career as a feed salesman at Schuyler Brown FS in Rushville.
And at that time, it was huge hog farms all over the place, poultry,
hog farms, beef, a little poultry, a little tiny bit of dairy, but it was mainly hogs.
I gotcha. Did you get a Dodge K car and a company car? And
I had a pickup truck. I borrowed money to buy a pickup truck, and the most interesting thing about it was a straight commission sales job.
100%.
100% commission.
Wow.
I supplied my own truck, supplied my own fuel, paid all the expenses associated with it.
And you probably collected on farm.
Well, yeah. And the funny thing about it is I can remember one of my first weeks on the job, first day on the job, I went home. I told my wife, I said, I've sold a couple salt blocks today. I don't know if this is going to work.
Very common. I wrote one in the same way. I went home one day and said, we're going to have to do something different. This ain't going to work.
Yeah. And one day, fortunately, I was friends with some other salesmen in the company, and I was at a place, and I had a plat book out and an FS hat on, and that the sales manager basically said, "Go get them."
Yeah,
gave me a customer list.
Yeah,
and I had made a big circle. I thought I was getting home, and I wound up right where I started.
Oh boy!
And so I threw the plat book down and stomped around my truck, and here come the fuel guy in the gas truck, and his name was Derek. And anyway, I said, "Hey, Derek, where the hell am I?" And he says, "Well, let me drive you home." So anyway, I made it home. I had a really great time as a feed salesman, though. Sure. I mean, I learned a ton of things, about animal husbandry and nutrition.
Sure.
And on hogs and beef, and it was just a good experience.
So this is 1979, and I think if I'm not mistaken, you retired 2 years ago, 2019. Yeah. So 40 years.
Yeah.
And in that time, I think you and I talked about this. You were general manager for one of the longest standing general managers, if not the longest standing general managers.
Yeah. When especially in one place, that's pretty rare in the grow mark system where somebody, when I was hired, I was the youngest GM. That was in 1991. I was 33 years old. I'd been a sales manager for a couple of years at Skylar Brown. I had moved up from feed salesman into sales manager.
Sure.
And then I got a chance to interview for general manager down at Jersey Farm Supply. So I went down there in 91. I was 33 years old. In 95, we actually merged with Greene County Service Company to form Tri-County FS.
Okay. Yep.
Which is Jersey, Greene, and Calhoun counties. And then, I had a lot of opportunities to do something different.
Sure.
But I don't know. I like Jerseyville. I wanted my kids. I didn't want to become an FS nomad and make tons of moves. And that my kids all graduated from Jerseyville High School. And I liked the community. I got involved in the community, and the company was doing fine. And we were growing. When I started down there, we had 6 million in sales and 29 employees. And
wow.
The day I retired, we were in the 60 million range and 115 employees.
Well, that's what we're going to spend a little time talking about how we can maybe help some of our viewers get to that stage. But currently you're retired.
Yep.
You're taking vacations and you're doing the retirement thing.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little about what you're doing and maybe who you're staying connected with in the industry. And
sure. Well, actually, yesterday I went up to the Maggie show up there in Bloomington, and I try to stay in touch with some of the guys that are still, working for FS, especially the new GM at Tri-County. His name's Jim Millville, the sales manager, Brett Jackson. We have conversations, at least once a month.
Sure.
I try to stay connected with some of the farmers and the board of directors at Tri-County and stay up.
You have a lot of ownership.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah. When you're honestly, when you're a GM more than 5 or 6 years, you really own it. I mean, whether
it's your creation,
performance is good or bad, you own it.
Exactly.
And, you can't. It's your culture. So it's an interesting. It's an interesting thing, an interesting process.
Well, and it's certainly taking you some time, I'm sure, to hand that off and say, I'm no longer getting my exactly. Yeah. So let's kind of focus in. There's so many areas that we could go to. Let's talk about the sales team, maybe specifically sales team and salespeople.
Yep.
So what would you say are 2 aspects of working with a sales team that helped you over those years? Like 2 of the most important aspects when it comes to sales and building sales teams and growing a sales organization.
Sure. I always looked at it as, especially as a GM, that there's only 2 teams in Tri-County FS. There's a sales team and a sales support team. And you've probably said that and know that.
Sure.
But if you're not directly working with the customer, you better be supporting somebody that is.
Right.
That's just basic stuff.
Sure.
From the girl that answers the phone to the the guy in the warehouse on the forklift, to the person that's maybe repairing a tire for a customer, to the guy that's delivering bulk feed, or the guy that's spraying or applying fertilizer in the field.
Sure.
I mean, every one of those is a point of contact and a moment of truth where you're actually having a service encounter with a customer.
Sure.
And in that customer's mind, that service encounter was either positive or negative, and sometimes neutral, but usually you're either trying to improve your image or maintain it.
And I always like to call it the brand. It's like, the company always advertises the brand, and not necessarily maybe the co-op, but the Tri-County will do, we're this and we're that, or whoever the brand is. And that's all good and fine. But the minute they pick up the phone and somebody insults them, hey, we're going to spray your field tomorrow, and they don't show up for 3 days. I mean, that becomes your brand. And,
it does.
And obviously that's absolutely critical.
Yeah. And it takes everybody. I mean, even down to billing, I mean, invoicing and the administrative side. People think, well, I don't deal with customers. Well, you know what, if you're billing tickets and they're wrong,
it's hard to go past that as a salesperson.
Yeah, and you should have been applying something to prepay.
Yeah,
and you just billed it, and you didn't take the time to be diligent. It's unfortunately my team at Tri-County, we're all pretty darn good at that.
Sure.
And getting the salespeople, getting everybody to act as a team is a challenge. It always is.
Sure.
Everybody pull in the same direction, but we even had meetings where we tried to train the sales force on what does the statement look like to the grower?
Yeah.
What do the tickets look like? What do the codes mean? So that they could at least answer some of the questions if
Sure.
a farmer had a question, because like it or not, the business has gotten complicated.
Right.
People prepay, people contract, people just buy net 10, and then you got people who want terms,
Sure.
and we've got programs that bundle, and there's a lot of stuff to think about. when you
Oh, yeah.
Bill a ticket.
So the product lines that you dealt with primarily were agronomy inputs.
Yep,
Crop
agronomy
inputs.
inputs, fertilizer, chem, seed, also fuel. We had liquid fuels and propane.
Yep.
And that we had a small feed business that wasn't very big, but that it was, the big hitters, were the fertilizer, chemicals, and seed. That was the big
Sure.
portion of the company. And then energy was, roughly about 20% of the company, and it was a big business. I mean, we moved a lot. We had 3 full-time fuel drivers, and then basically 3 full-time propane drivers.
So how do you keep, that's a lot of, you just think of the massive amount of rolling stock and people and things that could go on. Maybe that's what kept you awake at night. And,
Well,
yeah. So how did you, when you gave guidance to your sales managers, your salespeople, your team overall, what were some of the things that you focused on to get people heading in the right direction and not getting downtrodden? There's no shortage of seed suppliers in the market.
I guess at the end of the day, you got to make sure you get the right people on the bus. I've made mistakes hiring people.
Sure.
And I've hired somebody for sales that was wrong.
All right.
It wasn't good for them, or wasn't good for the company. And,
Sure.
either they part ways voluntarily or we had to let them go. That happens. It's part of managing.
Sure.
But if you get the right people and you give them the right support, you have to work awfully hard as the leader to lead by example, and just say, you have to get your strategy in place, but at the end of the day, you're responsible for the strategy too.
Yeah.
And we were a high value, high service co-op. So that basically meant we couldn't be the absolute cheapest every day on every product.
Sure.
Because we had expense of professional salespeople. We had a fleet of 13 or 14 John Deere sprayers that cost $300,000 a piece.
Absolutely.
The amount of rolling stock, the amount of personnel it took to do custom application, to just be ready, warehousing, and having good warehouse people. You can, from a farmer's standpoint, he sends his hired man in to get seed or whatever to finish up. And then if our warehouseman isn't on his toes and doesn't give him the right stuff, you got a problem then.
Absolutely. From that standpoint, you mentioned a lot of overhead, and this is where a lot of times I see management struggle with, sales teams struggle with getting the job done. So the 3-way pull is the salesperson is saying, we got to do everything and anything and be the cheapest in a sense, not always, but that's kind of their,
Right.
we got to compete price wise, competitive. Okay. The second part of it is the operations and the support staff and the accounting say, well, we need enough people that we can do our job. But people is the biggest expense. Payroll is tremendous.
Yep.
And then as a management, you're kind of looking over this whole thing. Now, in some companies, the sales team can be brought into that and become a part of that, either through here's our gross margin. It's got to stay above 10%, 20%, 20% maybe, but above 10% in order for us to pay for these 10 sprayers.
Yeah.
How did you incorporate that into the sales team? And I know over the course of 40 years, that was sometimes successful, sometimes
it
maybe
was
a struggle.
Part of it is you got to keep your programs fairly simple, but you do have to have programs. You've got to have something to differentiate what you offer from somebody else.
Right.
Because if you can't do that, at the end of the day, the farmer says, well, a bag of XYZ costs this much from this guy, and
Sure.
a bag of XYZ, the very same thing costs this much from this guy. What else are you doing for me than loading this bag? Well,
Why am I paying you
yeah,
extra?
I don't understand,
Yeah.
So you have to be able to really provide service, provide expertise, provide not counseling so much, but agronomic advice
Sure.
to the grower. The other thing that I found that was important too was being open and honest and communicating with all the employee team. Once a year, all the years that I managed, we had a year-end meeting. It was always around Christmas time. Our fiscal year ended the end of November, and I went through the numbers with them. I said, look, this is where we are. Units, this is where we were on units. We were, up or down. This is where we wound up on income. This was our people costs. This was our administrative costs. This was our facility costs. And the other thing that I did was every full-time employee at Tri-County was eligible for a bonus. So if the company did better, everybody got a bonus and did better and shared in it.
And that's not always the case. I mean, a lot of
No.
times that's available for management and sales somewhat, sometimes sales managers, but not
Well,
always.
but we just felt like it was important to have everybody pulling on the same rope. And that, to me, that always made me feel good to be able to give some nice bonuses to those guys that bounced around in those sprayers, sweated both grain bins,
Absolutely.
all the stuff you got to do to provide, forklift guys, the
Stuff that
warehouse
keeps
guys.
customers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And the girls at Bill, they were
Yeah.
eligible, everybody
Yeah.
was. So except for part-time people. And then the other side of that was, after I left, we might have had a few sales positions that weren't, but on the agronomy side, virtually every sales position that I had was tied to net income of the plant they worked at.
Interesting. So everybody's compensation is tied to their locations, net profit.
And how well that location performed.
I got you.
Because they were an integral part of it.
Yeah.
And they, the thing of it is, nobody's island. Nobody's some superstar that can go in and treat the operators bad and, get mad at the billers because they screwed up an account.
Sure.
I don't need any of that. Those prima donna guys that think they're great. I need people that can work hard, be responsible, and work as a team. And, that started at the top. I mean, I believe you lead by example. Sales managers, when we really got busy in the spring, it was all hands on deck.
Yeah.
And we tried to become a super efficient crop delivery system. And there were a lot of years you saw Dave Lewis driving a semi. So I mean, we just did
jumped in and had to take care of
what we did, to try to get things done.
And part of that is, especially in agronomy, you cannot staff the whole year for the
Right.
And that's, I always found, I mean, that was probably going from 19 years in the feed business to 5 years in the grain and agronomy business. It was amazing that, we were able to staff in the feed business. We were pretty
It's a
routine.
consistent year-round business.
Yeah, animals eat pretty much. There was a little bit of poultry boom and bust, but not much. But not compared to
Right.
planting and harvest in a grain elevator and in an agronomy business. That so how do you do that? Is people jump in? They do multiple roles,
Right.
and that falls on salespeople as well.
It
So
does.
go back, over your years. You mentioned hiring a lot of good and some mistakes. Let's talk about salespeople. What are maybe a couple of two most important factors for a success of a salesperson? What do they need to be and do? And what did you look for as you kind of went through your career? And you're like, okay, I've been down this path. I need to.
Well, the first thing I always look for was inherent traits,
Inherent traits. Okay.
personality.
Yep.
Does the person look like they might have a sense of humor?
Sure.
Not that you got, but honestly, so much of sales is building rapport.
Yeah.
It just is. There's no way around it. And if you're this guy that can't do a little small talk or have a little,
Connect on a human.
joke with, not that you have to, but with the customers.
Sure.
I mean, you're, so you got to look for the things. I can train product knowledge.
Yep.
I can train those specifics. But if you're inherently not a people person, I can't put that in you.
Yeah, it's tough.
I can't.
I mean,
Yeah.
May take a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we talk about, you know, and I've written about soft skills and hard skills. And
Sure.
typically when I talk to a company about sales training, they're like, well, we do a lot of that, but it's always, they're talking about technical. So it's chem, C, which you got to have. You can't,
Yeah.
it's going to be tough if you're an agronomist and you don't know the products. But once you get beyond that, there's a lot of people who know the products. Even customers are, with the internet, become smarter and smarter each day.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, so learning what we call the soft skills, what I call the essential skills, kind of become that deciding factor of, are they going to be different than the next person that comes along?
Right.
You know.
Right. You know, you got to have people that are motivated. You know, I don't know how I can make somebody that's not a go-getter and a morning person become that if they're just, I mean, there's some of that stuff you try to interview and you try to figure out, is that in
I
there?
was just going to ask you, how do you pick that? Because I've been on the same boat. I thought somebody was a perfect fit, and then all of a sudden this isn't working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what we've always tried to do is see somebody in action for a little while.
Yeah.
And we promoted a lot from within.
Sure.
We had to hire outside at time, you know, at times for sure. You just did. You didn't have somebody on your bench, but you know, if you had a guy that was good at operations and moved up, kind of became a leader in the operations area where people would go to him and ask him questions, and he would help on the radio. Hey, somebody's having a problem with a sprayer, and he says, hey, if it codes whatever, do this and you can keep going. Just, you'd hear things like that and you'd go, that guy's got leadership potential.
Sure.
And, you know, we were able to move quite a few of those people out of operations into crop sales, especially if they had some college that would line up with that, you know, agronomy or marketing or whatever. And, you know, it's difficult, but, you know, finding the right people is the whole key to it.
So today's environment, rated in all the surveys that all the farm magazines do, human hiring labor, so to speak, and that's not just labor in sales teams, but labor across the board in agriculture, agribusiness is one of the toughest.
It is.
You know, the baby boom generation is retiring. I think it's 10,000 a week or 10,000 a day, something like that.
Yeah.
It's and the replacement group is not there. So a lot of people are getting moved up into those roles from too early, and so I think that's a struggle that a lot of our audience is probably going through right now. I see it routinely as a sales trainer.
Yeah.
Hey, if you run across somebody that's in this area, I get a lot of those requests. So let's talk about, from a manager standpoint, why it's important and the reason it would be important for salespeople to understand this is that frequently I ask a question of a salesperson and they want me to coach them, or I'll call them up and I'll talk and I'll interview them before a training. And I'll say, hey, are you at capacity as a salesperson? Are you full? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, are you at, like, I got 5 customers and I need 100, or do you have 95 and you need 5? And that's a different focus. And so they'll tell me, and it's the scale is like, some of them have 20 and they say that I couldn't do any more, possibly.
Sure.
And then I got some that are at, 100 and they're like, I'm just getting started. And somewhere in the middle is probably the right answer. But how did you decide, okay, today, let's talk about a little bit about managing a sales team.
Yeah.
This person's out here doing $3 million in sales. Do I add another person? Do I get rid of that one and put one in there that can do 6? How do you go about that? How did you look at that?
I think what you have to do there is, everybody's an individual and every territory's got its own unique characteristics.
Sure.
At our Jerseyville plant, north of Jerseyville was bigger farms, bigger fields, more good going. South of Jerseyville, the ground got rougher, smaller fields, a lot more farmers to deal with. You might have, I know one crop specialist was telling me he had one account that had 100 fields. And, that's just a lot of paperwork,
Absolutely.
a lot of work.
A lot of mapping.
Yeah. And, you know, so you have to look at that as what can these guys handle?
Sure.
Just how much can they do when it gets busy?
Yeah.
Because it can get overwhelming. And I know I had salesmen at times were overwhelmed. You know, but we had dispatchers that were overwhelmed, and we had custom applicators that were overwhelmed. In ag, when it comes at you, you're drinking out of a fire hose for about 3 weeks,
Sure.
and you're overwhelmed. And if you're not overwhelmed during that 3-week period, something's wrong.
Something's not right. You're not
'Cause
selling
you'll
enough.
never
Yeah.
make it,
Right.
because you gotta make enough money in 4 months to last you 12.
Yeah.
So that's the bad part about you know, crop production, ag, you know,
Sure.
ag retailing with the agronomy stuff. But anyway, you know, some people are organized, some people are really good at using technology to be organized. Some people want to use, you know, a notepad and keep track of it that way. I don't care how you do it. If you've got a system that works for you,
Sure.
that's fine. But you know, getting the salesman to the right size and the right territory size was always, to me, a little work in progress, and it took a lot of monitoring. Because you wanted salespeople to grow, you wanted them to grow that territory. And then once they got it so big, they were like, I got more than I can do now, you know.
Yeah.
You get
yeah.
some of that. And then you had other areas where the market share was low, and you felt like, you know, you've got plenty of time to get out there
Absolutely.
and you know, shake the bushes and see who you can talk to.
How much of it was based on a financial? Hey, look, you know, without 3 million in sales, gross sales, I can't afford to put. I mean, you take a person's salary times about 1.3, 1.4.
Mhm.
So $100,000 employee cost 130,000 or 135,000 to put them on the ground with a
Right.
truck and an iPad, subscriptions to all the software.
Sure.
So at times you had to talk to people about, yes, I get it that you've got smaller operations, but you either got to spend less time and cover a bigger area, or we can't. These two lines aren't meeting.
Yeah.
We're not covering your probably in your later years, those were not as big of issues because you had it figured out. But I know I've worked with several customers that this is a struggle for them. They're not piecing that together.
Mhm.
And I always tell the salesperson, figure that out before your boss does, because
Yeah.
they may not give you
Yeah.
a lot of warning.
You know, the ones I'm thinking of right now, I mean, you know, I told you we compensation wise, we paid salesmen based on the profitability of that location.
Sure.
When it came, you know, to bonuses, they did get a base throughout the year. Okay.
Right.
We wanted people that earn a good living. But the one guy that had the territory that was, you know, a little more chopped up, but he saw that, you know, we did pay commission per unit on seed.
Yeah.
So he thought, you know, the way I'm going to make it, I'm not going to make it, you know, cranking out tons of ammonia like the guy in the area with the big acres.
Right.
Because our guys are using urea, they're using solution, they're using some ammonia, but it's just more, you know, it's just not quite the same ag intensity agronomy wise as other areas. So he really concentrated on seed and grew that business and made a good living, you know, because we did pay, you know, the commission. If you got a salesman, the way I always looked at it is, if you got a salesman that looks at his territory like he owns it,
yeah,
and it's his business,
right,
you got a good salesman.
Absolutely. And
And
I feel like that I always tell you, you're on commission, but you're in your small business. You're a small
Yeah.
business. You're in a franchise with just a few of those, that line moved a little bit over.
Yeah.
If you look at it that way, because somebody might look at it that way. They say, hey, we got a fee for that person. We could just truncate that. And some of those customers are going to stay with us. I mean,
yeah,
it's a tough way to look at it, but you have to think that way, because especially in today's, and where I was going to ask you about the future, in today's environment where you've got buyers that can learn. Used to be the salesman role to go out and tell customers about their business, about the products. Yeah, you still have to do that, but they can learn a lot on their own. They can go to, you know, many of them college graduate levels are high. They're going to agronomy schools. They're going to the same meetings that we're at. You mentioned
Sure.
Maggie and
Yeah,
the Illinois Fertilizer Show that's in January or whenever that is. I
right.
mean, there's a lot of producers that go to that and say,
There is.
they know as much as we do. So I think it's critical that somebody in sales looks at their territory as, this is my own little small business.
Yep.
And case in point, we used to have a competitor that did free freight, and a customer would say free freight, and I said, nothing's free. Amazon delivers packages for free. Well, they're not
Right.
really free.
Yeah.
That driver gets a salary, and it
Yep.
comes out of their margin. It could be out of my margin, charged separately. And so years ago, we weren't matching inbound freight with outbound cost, or excuse me, outbound freight with inbound cost of freight.
Okay.
We had a contract.
Yeah.
And I had to tell work with a salesman, say, look, sooner or later, these two lines got to meet. You got to
Yeah.
charge the same amount we're getting charged. And if you don't, and that's looking at it as your own business.
Mhm.
Hopefully, as your business owner, you would look and say, hey, we're getting charged $1 a mile, and we're only charging 50 cents a mile.
Mhm.
There's a problem with it.
Yeah.
So,
The reality of it is that I've always found too, from my seat as GM was, at the end of the day, we were a local business. Okay, we had employees that bought houses, that spent money at car dealers, that went to the local grocery stores and went to local restaurants for lunch.
sure.
And if a farmer ever I had a chance to talk to one, and they complain about, hey, that price structure, that's just too high or whatever. I don't know how that's going to work, but at the end of the day, you're a local, high value, high service business, and that has to be worth something.
Right.
You cannot say that's worth nothing. And the growers that say that's worth nothing, when they get in a pickle and call you, your salesmen have to be on the ball to remind them that now today is the day you're finding out what
Exactly.
we are worth.
That's right.
So, and
Yeah.
that's happened a lot.
It has, and I think I saw this more in the grain. I learned it more in the grain side of the business. We had a group of salespeople that went out and originated grain, and it was unusual at that time. This was 20 years ago. And they came back and they wanted to push basis so that we could buy grain at the same price that the local elevator was buying it. And we said, hey, if we got to match the local elevator, your cost per bushel is X amount. There's a cost for $100 and some thousand for a salesperson to go do that. If it's not worth a little more, then we'll just put a sign out that says corn is $3.65 today.
Right.
And so a little bit of it is like, when you say I need to have those same prices, you're kind of saying, hey, I'm not differentiating myself with my customers. And it's a discussion you want to have before they get caught in a pinch when they're out there. So I think it's extremely important. Kind of where we're coming with this conversation is, in today's environment, if your business structure does not allow you to charge, or you as a salesperson, as a trusted advisor, as a trained professional doing consultative work, if it is not willing to accept that cost, then what, as a general manager, you're in that spot of saying, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
How do I hold this sales force and then charge the same margin structure of 6% that maybe somebody that sells it out of it with no overhead?
That, the FBN thing was coming in pretty good when my last few years, and there was a lot of discussions. We've had boardroom discussions about it. What are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
And, the reality of it is, we're not that, we don't have that business model. And if you have that business model, then that's different.
Sure.
But and I told the board a few times, we can have that business model. It just it won't look like it does today if we do that.
That's right.
We've got millions of dollars of expense to strip out of this.
Before it
If you just want to be a product and a price.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of rolling stock to sell.
Yeah.
And then then the discussion goes, well, we don't want that. You don't want, but at the end of the day, everything's going to get paid for.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, that's a good segue into the future. So we got all kinds of futuristic, you can put your futuristic hat on, put it in the near future. Let's go a couple of years out. From let's talk about technology. From a sales team technology, what do you see as being some of the top focus areas that I just got done going through Info Ag this past 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
I saw every imaginable drone system and data management software down there that you could swing a stick at, and they're all very good what they're trying to do. And where do you see the technology for a salesperson going and changing in the next couple of years?
Well, you can overwhelm yourself with data.
Yeah.
And the farmer can overwhelm himself with data. The ability for us to collect data is unprecedented right now. And the technology for the salesman, like the CRM stuff with, knowing where you've been, where you're going, who you need to go back with, customer relationship management and all that. That's important, and that's good, and that's a big time thing. And I think salespeople have to harness some of that tech just to remain efficient. And if at the end of the day all your competitors are efficient and you're not, what happens?
Absolutely.
You wind up, being the guy making buggy whips.
That's right.
So, but that being said, to me the winner at the ag retail gate in the future is the person that's able to take data and simplify it.
Yeah.
People really want 2 or 3 choices. They don't want 50.
It's take and I talk about wearing complexity on our sleeve. We love to wear complexity, especially in a technical industry, and data is the same way. It's, you can do all these things, and you mentioned CRM. I watched the Salesforce person sell us Salesforce. I got the chance to watch that happen.
Yeah.
And he made it sound so complicated. I thought, make the complicated sound easy. Yeah. And as producers are no different. I looked across the sea of monitors that they can have, and data coming from, like you mentioned, we have this ability. Which data do we need to look at and use, and can we create dashboards that can actually be used in management of the business?
Yeah. I mean, you can, I don't know if you know Mo Russell, the consultant out of Iowa that does ag stuff. We had him in actually do a producer meeting back in early 2000s, and he had a quote that the grower can chase the wrong rabbit, and I always remembered that. It kind of stuck with me because $20 a ton, $30 a bag on seed, 10 cents a gallon on diesel fuel. All that stuff is sort of important, but if the grower spends all of his time, chasing that price rabbit, but he forgets about, well, what's the agronomy side say? What's the production side? I need to be making 250 bushels at $5. If I do that, I'm going to have income tax problems.
If margin per acre, or net revenue per acre.
Exactly. So people, growers need information. They need to know how to grow the best crop they can on the land they farm, the soil type they've got. They need to understand risk management. And I think we, as ag retailers, need to understand that better. What crop insurance is, how does it work, what levels make sense. And to me, that was one area that I always felt like, growers skimped.
Crop insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's subsidized in the first place.
Sure.
So if something's subsidized, why don't you buy the Cadillac?
Yeah.
And you'd always have these conversations with growers, and the ones I had, even on a year that was a little tough. Well, I bought that 70% because it was a little cheaper. And when I got all done with my combine, I was just that close to getting having a claim. I didn't get a claim. Well, if you spend an extra $20 an acre and bought the very best stuff you had, over time, you're probably going to pay for that insurance with a claim to where it's free. over time. And you just have to look at it that way. You just have to say that's a cost of me doing business.
You either got to opt all in or all out.
Yeah.
To me, it's like
Yeah.
if you try to hit and miss, pick and choose, you're gonna
Yeah.
somewhere along the line, you're gonna end up
Yeah.
paying more for it.
Yeah.
How about from a customer standpoint, futures of working with customers? We mentioned farms getting bigger and smaller. You mentioned north of you, bigger and smaller.
Yeah.
We hear a lot about consolidation.
Yep.
In both agribusiness and co-ops.
Yep.
Several in
Getting
Wisconsin
bigger.
are now down to about 4. So what do you see the salesperson's role, sales team's role as this happens with? Are you going to see segmentation, or do you think it's just kind of business as usual?
No, I think it'll be more segmentation, and the other thing to remember too is your salespeople are the key to your business. The relationships they have
Sure.
with those customers, that especially the ones that buy across the board. I mean, those were the A+ customers that bought
The gold
fertilizer,
customer, yeah,
seed,
yeah.
fuel,
Right.
chem, propane. If they needed a bin, they even got that from you. I mean, you got to take care of those guys.
Sure.
The other thing is some of these growers are getting pretty sizable. The 10, 15, 20,000 acre guys.
Yeah.
One point in time, I didn't think we'd ever see any around us, but there's a few of them in that area now.
Yeah.
What was interesting with me is, I tried to get salespeople to work with some of them. Some of them I had to kind of work with a little bit, and
Well, they're looking for something completely different.
they are, and that really wasn't our core strategy, but it's
Sure.
Those big guys. I mean, they're running a big operation. They want to talk to the boss. And
Yeah.
that
Make
if you're the boss, you just that you default to that. And I had enough salesmen in me. I was fine with it.
Sure.
I would do it, and I never, ever complained if my number was on a farmer's speed dial.
Well, I think you can, as long as you have your areas to work. Hey, the
Yeah.
mechanics of getting you information is going to come here.
Right.
You want to talk to me about big picture stuff, or here's a decision. I think that can be. I had plenty of I call them the Walmart size accounts. They were accounts that one single person wasn't going to be able to handle them anyway. There was
Yeah.
too much complexity to it, and
Yep.
and price decisions were a factor because their size. There was a few of them on the grain side that were putting in their own railheads.
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah.
I mean, when you're doing
And that's
that,
a different market.
it
I mean,
is.
it really is.
You're trading rail cars now instead of
Yeah.
1,000 bushel trucks. So,
Yep.
Well, let's talk about your future. You mentioned what you like to do. You're retired. You're
Yep.
doing some work, some part-time.
Yep.
You and I had a little discussion about what you like to do, and
Sure.
you've got a heck of a lot of experience.
Oh yeah.
And you're not too old, you can't work. So
Yeah.
in today's environment, people are working a lot later in life. So
Oh, they are.
well, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you or get in touch with you or say, hey, I'd like to maybe talk to you about doing some contracting work or something
Sure.
along those lines.
Yep.
How would they get
Probably the easiest would be just give me an email.
Okay.
I'll give you my email address, or
we'll put it in the notes?
Yeah,
for
we
sure.
put it in the notes to where if they want to email me, they can. I'd be happy to talk. My real passion was, trying to pull the levers to increase the performance.
Sure.
And as a GM, that's your job.
Yeah.
You got to figure out what levers do I pull to grow, what levers do I pull to make net income.
Sure.
And then, and all that's got to be done working with a board of directors. And I had a real passion for that. I just always felt good about, I like board meetings. I like the relationship between the GM and the farmer board.
Sure.
I had good relationships with directors over my 30 years of managing. It's a nice thing when you can stay in the same place that long. You get some real continuity.
Absolutely.
I had an old manager tell me when I started, he said, son, in 5 years, if you don't have the board you want, it's your fault.
You had talked about that before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, it's kind of like that with a sales. When you build a sales team, it's like after you've hired and trained for a few years, it's like it's your team.
Yeah.
And you take a lot of ownership to that. And
it's your culture. And, you gotta, Tri-County was successful. We really had some successful growers on our board. I mean,
Sure.
the one thing that I was super proud of was as I went into a board meeting, we had 10 directors. And I kicked the giant, big commercial accounts out as far as producers go, guys that are farming, producing corn and beans.
Yeah.
8 of those 10 were on our top 20 accounts. And the other 2 were in the top 50.
Okay.
So when you have a board meeting and you've got this, these top leaders in ag in your trade area sitting on your board, and you're trying to explain to them the need to do something that's progressive, and a lot of them you don't have a lot of explaining to do.
Right.
They're like,
Yeah, they see the need.
we need to go to auto track, we need to go to auto boom shut off, we need to go to, mapping programs. Yeah. And we didn't have it. That was one thing I was most pleased with. We just didn't have much controversy in boardrooms. We there was times somebody bring up an issue where you get a
Sure.
little,
And that's not the case. A lot of times there's going to
Yeah.
be some problems depending on who you have on your board.
exactly.
Wanting you to do something that maybe isn't profitable.
So,
Yeah.
if somebody has, farm board of directors are struggling with, I'd be more than happy to
Talk.
have a visit with them, because I feel pretty strongly about there's ways to deal with that situation that can come out with a happy ending.
Perfect. Well, Dave, it's been great to know you, to get to meet you. You and I have
Yeah.
called on you. I've called on you several years
Oh,
now,
yeah.
and now you're in a home office here in
Yeah.
the studios of
Well-
Ag Sales Professional, because you live here in St. Charles.
I know.
And appreciate you being out here, and look forward to seeing you and
Yep.
at the meetings and working with you in that capacity.
Sounds good, Greg. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.